Hi, I'm Marissa S. White. For those of you who don't know me, I'll tell you a little bit of backstory about me, but I was originally a drawing and painting major in college, and they made us kind of dabble in all the different disciplines within the art school. And so I tried out, sculpture and printmaking and, a few other things, but ended up taking black and white photography because, yes, I went to school in the 90s, and I fell in love with it. You couldn't get me out of the dark room. I was in there day in and day out, and yeah, I ended up staying in college a whole extra semester longer, much to my parents' dismay, taking extra photography classes. And at that point, all of my drawing and paintings actually became more mixed media collages, where I was using a lot of photography in that work. So fast forward several years later, I got out into the real world, worked at an advertising agency, sold payroll for a little bit, even owned my own payroll business for a little while. And then once I sold that, my husband really encouraged me to really pursue the photography. And I went to the Rocky Mountain School of Photography in the summer of 2012. It was the best summer of my life, and I completely just immersed myself in it. And it was there that I really embraced digital photography and Photoshop specifically. So before that, especially being taught in the darkroom, I was a bit of a purist, and it took me a long time to embrace the digital side of photography. And actually my husband, when we got engaged as an engagement present, bought me my first digital SLR camera. So 2 years later, again, learning Photoshop, and it was at that moment that my mind was just completely like blown wide open, like, oh my God, now everything that has been in my head, I can actually create in the real world. So the work that I do now is, I would say, kind of, a transition, or what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of not so dissimilar from, I guess, the work I did back in the day. So before I was doing mixed media collages, and now they're still collages, but they're just completely photography based and computer based in that sense. So digital composites, if you will. I did grow up in Houston, and we have one of the museums there. It's called the Menil Collection, and they house one of the largest collections of Rene Magritte paintings. And he was always one of the painters that I admired most when I was youngest. Of course, loved all the surrealists, and who doesn't love good Salvador Dali, but his stuff got a little freaky. Whereas Rene Magritte's work, loved the clouds, but there was a simplicity behind what he was trying to do, and lots of breathing room within his space. And I definitely kind of admired that quality, because you always know exactly what you're looking at. So I can definitely say that that's a huge influence in my work, and really why I was drawn to surrealism, and why all the work that I do now really kind of follows that kind of dreamy landscape, if you will. So yeah, that's a little bit about me in the past there. So this work, titled Above Below, was really inspired through beekeeping, actually. So this year I became a beekeeper for the first time, and it's been an experience, I have to tell you. So I picked up my bees actually last year. I bought myself a Christmas present, which was the actual hive itself. But being here in Colorado, we can't actually do anything with the bees until it starts to warm up. So I ordered my bees in advance and got a box. I think they call it a nuke. No, it's a package of bees. That was just a box of bees that had about roughly 10,000 of them, plus the queen in it, and picked them up in April and introduced them to my hive, and have been kind of watching the entire colony grow this entire summer. So it's been really fascinating. By no means am I an expert, but I have learned in the education process of being the mother of bees, all kinds of fascinating things about these tiny little creatures. So I'm gonna bore you with some details here real quick that I just found to be absolutely fascinating, but, and in case you guys don't already know about them, but the colonies itself for all bees are ultimately matriarchal based, of course. So we've got the queen bee, and then all the females, all of the bees that you actually see out in the field that are foraging for pollen are all females. So the males only have one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to mate with the queen. And for those that are successful, usually have a very untimely death immediately after that happens. For those of us, those are the drones that make it longer, usually get kicked out of the hive come the end of summer, because they don't serve any additional purpose outside of the colony. They don't tend to the hive. They don't they don't take care of anything hive related. So the other bees, the female bees, will just kick them out, so that way they're not continuing to drain on the resources. So that was kind of a fascinating discovery. The queen can lay about 1,500 plus eggs a single day, which is also kind of amazing. She will live the longest out of any of the bees. She'll live for approximately 5 to 6 years, but the average life cycle for both female and male bees are roughly about 45 days, except for those in the winter. So come, this time of year, it's coming into late October right now, but they're going to start creating a winterized bee that can live up to 6 months long, and their purpose will really be to help keep the queen alive during the winter. So that is also pretty amazing that they know how to instinctively kind of do that. Also, the bees, if they recognize that the queen is about ready to pass, they will start to create and raise a new queen, and they'll build a whole different cell that's not the same size as the regular combs within the hive. It's more peanut shaped, and they will take an egg that has been laid in one of the other combs and introduce it to that peanut shaped cell and feed that particular larva royal jelly, and that will actually is all that is needed in order to birth the new queen. So a few other fascinating things. Bees are the only insect that can produce an edible food source for all of us, and it doesn't go bad, which is also really amusing considering everything else. It's like it's antibacterial in some form or fashion. And there was an article that came out a long time ago, I think in 1922 actually, they went into King Tut's tomb and discovered that there was honey left in his tomb, probably for his spirits coming back from the afterlife, and that honey, even though it was 3,000 years old, was still completely edible. So honey, of course, does crystallize, but it doesn't actually go bad. So, but I would have to say that the most fascinating thing of all, and if, this is not anything necessarily new, but that the bees they are the main pollinator that pollinates most every plant on Earth, essentially. There are other pollinators out there, some butterflies, some other insects. I think even bats are known to help with that, but it's primarily the bees that take care of all of this. I know there are farmers out in California actually that will hire beekeepers to bring their hives out to the almond fields, and then the bees just go crazy pollinating all of the flowers in there, so that way they have a good crop for the year. So within all of that, I had read a quote that Einstein had stated, basically that if the bees disappear off the planet, that we have roughly 4+ years, give or take, before all of life and existence ceases, just because of this really a little amazing creature. So now with that in mind, that really kind of set the stage for all the work that I was doing, and looking at, this one little creature is that important that there's got to be a lot of other things. There's no accident into the way that this earth was put together, that everything seems to have a purpose, and that in all of that, everything is really connected in one shape or another, whether we pay attention to it or not. It's just really kind of amazing, all the different things that you start to uncover when looking at it through this lens. And so, being a little nerdy, my husband is a scientist, so I kind of dove into the internet, if you will, kind of looking for other instances where this existed. And some of the most basic things that we've heard about, like every living thing is comprised of the basic elements of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. Carl Sagan said it best, like, we're all made of stars, right? Even the human body is made of these particular elements. Tolkien had it right. If you are a big fan of Lord of the Rings and how the Ents would come together and they would communicate with each other, but there have been studies that have shown that the trees actually do communicate through the root systems, and they can send out, I guess, kind of like a telephone call or a chemical reaction or something that will let the other trees know where, to send resources if trees are ailing and they need a little bit more assistance, or if something's, I think I even read too that some trees, if they get chopped off and their base is still alive, that the other trees around it will help supply nutrients to keep that base alive. It's actually really, really kind of fascinating. And then other things too, I was communicating with the lady that owns the Wolf Center, and then reading up a little bit more on wolves and why they are important to the ecosystem, especially here in Colorado, and which, they're just getting ready to reintroduce them out into the wild as well. But one of the things I had learned was how, without the wolf, without the predator, the elk and deer, of course, just increase in population. There's less fear for them to be out kind of in the wild, and so they're, eating just about everything in sight. They're congregating a lot of times over in the rivers and along the riverbanks and eating the grasses along those sides. And it's starting to erode the riverbanks. And, not only was that important for the river, but all of the fish and other animals and beavers even that would kind of exist within those spaces and how that would start to degrade how the river flowed. And so things that you just don't think about, right? Other things that I've always found to be fascinating too, going kind of back to trees, but how, of course, they provide CO2, excuse me, that's backwards. They take in CO2 and then emit oxygen, which is exactly the opposite of us. Obviously we need oxygen to survive, and then we emit CO2, which just feeds the tree. So it's that whole symbiotic relationship that happens between us and plants. We really do need each other to survive. And then just other little kind of patterns that mimic each cells, like the canopy of a tree just mimics the branches of our lungs, and how fascinating that is. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot of other things that I could go on and on about. But with all of those things in mind, I really did try to, bring some symbols into the work that I was playing with here to kind of represent some of those ideas. One of the biggest ones was the use of water, because I look at, the Earth here, and you look at all the other planets within our solar system, not a single one, bears water. And then researching a little bit more found that there's not another planet out there that has water on it for another 4.25 light years. They've named this planet Proxima b. I don't know if there's a Proxima a, but it's called Proxima b. But it is really far away. And so how is it that we all ended up here, and that, water is comprised of 70% of the Earth, so are our bodies. Every living thing needs water to survive on this planet, and so much in fact that if we go without it for 3 to 7 days, that we will die without this precious substance. So there are plenty of pieces within this work. I think, probably 2/3 of them that do have water kind of within that notion. Well, excuse me, not within that notion, but within each individual piece. So again, going to the idea of our bodies being comprised mainly of water, the mere fact that most mammals are born, and they start the first several months of their existence in the womb, which is completely surrounded and filled with water. And so anyhow, that's a good reason why that substance appears in most of these pieces here. So that was one, like the major symbol that shows up. The use of animals and then sacred geometry was another important factor for me as well too. The animals all have kind of little spiritual meanings to them, and then the sacred geometry, it's kind of an interesting thing I wanted to kind of play with here. Lori had talked about how she was bringing landscapes into her abstract painting and how that was kind of a new thing for her. And for me, I also kind of dabbled in something new as well too, and it was the use of symbols and symbology within the work. So there are 5 pieces where I have introduced symbols. This piece over here called Resonance of Golden Proportions has the golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence, that's kind of layered through it. And that's known to be kind of the universal number, if you will. And sacred geometry in its own sense is really, what do we call it? It's kind of, it's basically the recognition of repeated patterns in nature. It's kind of the universal architecture, if you will. And so people had noticed that there were specific patterns that showed up all over the place, and then tried to assign geometry to it to kind of, not necessarily explain it, but just kind of record it in such a way. And so specifically the Fibonacci sequence is one of those where the pattern of it shows up in a lot of different elements around in nature. So you get it in like the spiral of a galaxy, or the nautilus shell, the spiral of that, how sunflower seeds are kind of laid out, pine cones, and the way that they spread as well. And then you can dive in it even a little bit deeper and look at like the work of Leonardo da Vinci and how he started to kind of frame the face and the body, his Vitruvian Man. shows the different proportions of the body, and they actually all fit within the scope of the Fibonacci sequence, and that kind of universal ratio sits at like 1.6, kind of goes on forever. And it's taken from, it's really, this kind of fun little equation, but taking the number 1 plus 1 equals 2, and then you take the two preceding numbers, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, so on and so forth. And that's how it basically comes out. But the other interesting thing too is looking around, you start to notice that really in nature that these numbers kind of exist all over the place. So you could look at a particular flower and see that the petals of the flower, the total number of petals, actually equate to a number within the Fibonacci sequence. Same thing could go for the number of branches within a tree. So it's really, I mean, we have 5 fingers on our hands, right? So 2 eyes, like, yeah, the different parts of our bodies even kind of all align within that ratio. So those were all really kind of fascinating to me. An interesting thing about this piece too, because I think, well, within that golden ratio, there's that ideal beauty, if you will. I think that's another thing they say too, that those that their symmetry within the face fits most with the golden ratio, or kind of that idealized beauty, if you will. But the way that I kind of look at it within the art world, I think there's maybe a certain inclination to the way that us artists, or at least for myself, will frame certain pieces. And I actually created the composition for this entire piece first, and then laid over the golden ratio, and was kind of pleasantly surprised on how that actually fit in perfectly, essentially with that in mind. So anyway, that was a kind of a little fun aha moment for me. But then there's a few other uses in here too. Like I said, there's 5 total pieces where I use sacred geometry. The one with the zebras, which is called kindred. The symbol and the zebra is actually kind of the meaning for it. It all comes together as one. So the symbol itself is called the Sri Yantra, and it really does stand for kind of the yin yang. It represents feminine and masculine. It's kind of a little bit of, shows, I guess, the interconnectedness of the universe, if you will. And then the zebras themselves too also kind of mimic that with the black and white stripes, kind of also that yin yang, that balance, if you will. And then there's that sense of community in their own right, because they are, an animal that travels in herds. These pictures, actually, I photographed in Namibia, and while we were out there, our little tour guide was telling us too about how the zebras pair really well with the wildebeest, and which was kind of surprising. But they said yes, it's like the symbiotic relationship that they have. That the zebra is, well, I can't remember which one is which, but one can see better and the other one can hear better. One will eat just the top part of the grass, and the other one will eat a little bit lower. And so really they work really well together, and just kind of maintaining that safety, a sense of community, and kind of just a social aspect to their existence. And so kind of that's what this piece kind of means and represents there to me. But yeah, so each of the animals in here do kind of follow through with the meaning and what I'm trying to express within each of these pieces. So the last piece I'll talk about is this particular piece. It's called Stardust. I'm wearing the dress that was used in the creation of this piece here too. And before I talk about this a little bit more, I would preface this by saying too, initially when I started to create this work, I really did initially want it to be more about just nature and the earth and the symbiotic relationships, how everything was connected on that level. The previous work that I did that was at Croiser a year ago, called Certain These Clouds Go Somewhere, was really more about a spiritual journey, and I wanted to kind of leave that out and focus on the here and now, if you will. But as I started creating the work, sometimes the work tells you what it's intended to be. And I don't always have control over that too. I think the muse takes over a lot in that instance. But it basically, I was trying to state that in this time in my life, that I think trying to separate the spiritual side of things was impossible, and that it needed to come out. And that was really a very necessary part of what I was trying to communicate here, is that yes, we ourselves are part of this universe, we are part of this planet, and whether there's an energy that runs through every living thing, including us, and that connects us to every living thing. And there's no way to separate the kind of spiritual side, at least for me, from what I'm trying to convey. So with that in mind, this particular piece, I will share the story behind it. But a few years ago, ever since I came to Colorado, I have been engaging a little bit more in a spiritual practice. And one of my neighbors is kind of my guru, if you will. And she had gotten us together, a little tribe of ladies, and we would talk all the time and then meditate together. And so I remember this one time, and this was, again, probably 4 years or so ago, that's how long it has stayed with me, that we were all sitting down and she kind of led us through a guided meditation. It's all started, as it always does, in nature, and we're kind of out there, and it's a beautiful day, and we're walking along a stream, and then somehow there's a door appears, and we walk into the water, and a door appears, and then we were kind of set off on our own, adrift in our own mind, and taking off across whatever ether individually we needed to. But so for me, I remember, I think I was flying over the Rocky Mountains or some kind of snowy mountain drift, and I felt a lot like Superman, who was headed out to the Fortress of Solitude. and then out of nowhere, just like within a finger snap, I found myself at what felt like floating out in the middle of the universe. And I remember just looking around and seeing all just like the beautiful colors. I felt like there was a galaxy just off in the distance, and you could see that spiral and all the stars. And I was so excited, and I remember looking around like, who can I share this with? I have to share this because it's so beautiful. And there was nobody around me. And I kind of remember pausing and just feeling a little sad. And then I looked down at my body, and everything from the waist down just started to dissolve into stars. And it was so beautiful. And then I remember looking around at everything else and realizing that I wasn't alone, that all the other stars that were out there were in fact additional souls, other souls. And it was just this beautiful reminder. As I was looking out, first off, I remember feeling like this complete, utter, like unconditional love that just came over me and just completely brought me to tears. And then yes, that recognition that we're not alone, that we're never alone, despite how alone we sometimes feel, that we are all really connected in this journey together. So yes, so that's kind of what Stardust means to me. So thank you so very much. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.